Hi, everyone. I am Kelly, and this is Vote Her In. Vote Her In is a collaboration between Two Broads Talking Politics and Rebecca Sive. Rebecca is the author of Vote Her In, Your Guide to Electing Our First Woman President. And I am going to turn it over to Rebecca now, who will introduce tonight's guest. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Kelly. Glad to be here as always, and always with a wonderful guest. They're all very serious. They're all very gifted. They're all disciplined. Some of them are sort of more effervescent, right? And serious at the same time. So our guest this evening is Julie Castro Abrams, who I think falls in that category. When we were chatting backstage for a minute about some things, we said, we're just going to nudge you a little and you're going to talk. So let me introduce her first. We were talking a little bit about how long we have probably known each other. Julie was a very early staff member, which is where she learned a lot, I believe, for the Chicago Foundation for Women, which is one of the member foundations of this Women's Funding Network, whose board committee on governance she chairs. And from there, she went on to a series of positions, but they've always pretty much been focused, as I have seen it, in working with women who are both interested in issues of women's equality and opportunity and advancement, and interested in business and wanting to address the issues that confront women in the corporate world. And when we were thinking about this and I was sort of writing out what we might want to talk about, I realized it's really important for us as policy wonks to look at what's happening in the business world as well, and as women who care about executive leadership, to talk about what's going on there. So I sort of sat for a minute. I said, I'm calling Julie. She's going to talk to us about all this. And lo and behold, also learned in a mailing I got from her that it's Hispanic Heritage Month, and her organization, How Women Lead, is specifically focusing on a campaign to recruit more Latinas to positions of power and influence in business. So we're going to talk this evening with Julie about these matters of women's advancement and opportunity, and changing the usual drill, I think, in the business world, and how we can companion and partner across the sectors to generally improve women's lives. So welcome, Julie. We're really glad you're here. I'm going to just jump right in and start with the first question, which basically centers around your own path and how you decided after a while, but not too long, to focus in this arena, and why you felt it was compelling for you, compelling in terms of what you might be able to do, and then share with us a bit about How Women Lead, and how that's come together, so to speak. So welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor. I've been an admirer of yours for 30 years, Rebecca, if we could out ourselves a little bit here. We met in Chicago, but the way you introduce me makes me sound like I'm a corporate person. I've never worked really in what you would call a corporation. I'm a social justice warrior. I'm just subversive, like in how I do it, right? So I went to the University of Chicago for social work school. And when I did that, I really realized the clinical social work wasn't going to work for me because I needed outcomes. And what it did is it gave me a platform to be able to come up with my own strategy of how I wanted to move in the world. And I started my career with defining a strengths-based approach, frankly, to poverty alleviation at the Merit School of Music in Chicago. And that was where we would give, kids who may have grown up in subsidized housing a violin, and all of a sudden they weren't the public housing kid, they were the violinist. And it changed how they showed up in the world, the relationships they could build, and the definition that they had for themselves and others. And then for 11 years, Rebecca and I worked on helping low-income women start their own companies. And one of the things that we found is especially for the women who were the most challenged they had the greatest success financially, and created the most jobs and sustained the longest because there weren't a lot of other options. So if you have a safety net, it's pretty easy to quit when the going gets tough. So truly for me, I started my whole career in grounds up social justice and social work, and poverty alleviation work. And then I got to a point that some of us do in our career where I was like, all right, I've done it on the ground. That was super hard. I loved it. Super, super hard. And I thought, well, how can I have a bigger lever and use some of my where I show up in the world? So this sort of like, I'm a nerdy University of Chicago quant person at the same time as I'm a bleeding heart justice person. And I can marry those two and kind of created something that, maybe even a little bit by accident. So How Women Lead is a network, kind of depending on how you define it, between 10 and 50,000 women who are all top executive women, and I wouldn't say only corporate, foundation leaders, leaders in politics and government, but largely corporate women leaders. And basically saying, okay, this is the first generation we've ever had of this many women with the positional power and influence and wealth and education and experience in business that we can that we've ever had, so we can activate us, them, all of us, right? And so we have decided that we were going to tackle some of the things that were the most powerful, but yet the most inequitable. So if you look at the roles that have the biggest influence in our country, on all of us, on job creation and the quality of life in our cities, if you think about it, like, we've got how many of these presidents, including our beloved Barack Obama, would bring these corporate leaders together as if the CEO of Microsoft or whatever somehow have some unique input into how the country should be run. So if we're really going to be listening to these people, we better get some women in there, because they were all white men, to be honest. And so for me, my whole mission is breaking inequity, and getting women on corporate boards is a huge way to influence the trajectory of companies. And it's also great business. That we have data for 20 years that says if you have diversity on your board, you make better decisions, you make more money, and risk is managed. I'll just give you one example of that. Recalls, product recalls that can, kill you, hurt you, other things, are 3 times faster when you have a diverse board. Think about that. That's life and death. That's a big deal. So in why? Because we have to disrupt groupthink. It's really fun and easy if you have a group of people who all think like you, and you're like, oh yeah, Rebecca's got it covered. I'll just kind of show up and skim the materials because Rebecca always really does her homework and she knows what she's talking about. Well, if Rebecca and I don't agree and I really want my voice heard, I'm going to do my research. I'm going to show up. I'm going to make sure I'm prepared. And that's the kind of dynamism we need in our governance in this country, in companies that, are employing just thousands and thousands of people, and in those policies about families and family leave, or how do you handle a pandemic? Do you let people work from home? All those things really are influenced at the governance level, at a board level, and we have to have a diversity of representation in those seats of power. So we got all of the women in our network together and said, hey, there's some whispering of some legislation coming out of California with Senator Hannibeth Jackson. What do they need from us? And what they needed is they needed corporations and people that represent them to sign letters for the governor, so that he could make this decision. Well, you know what happened just a couple days before he was signing that legislation? We had this last Supreme Court nominee, or the person who was put on our Supreme Court, that many of us didn't agree with. And let me tell you, the governor knew he had to do something for women, and so he passed that legislation. So our noise, our power of numbers, and our positional influence has now taken us from 10% of California board directors being women to 27% this year. Huge change. I mean, it's just massive sea change. The other thing that we've done together is, and we do things like we have a giving circle, we give grants to women and girls organizations. we have all these great women leaders who help women running social justice organizations across the world. But we also created a venture firm. So we are all, we basically look 2% of venture dollars go to women founded companies. It's absolutely criminal. Nobody could possibly have any reason for why that is the case except bias. And so who's making decisions in venture, who's running venture firms? It's not women and women of color. And so we decide, well, we're going to get together and create our own, because we're not trying to get someone else to change their behavior is a long game, and you got to be patient. I'm not. And so 211 of us got together, raised $10 million in the pandemic in just a couple months. That was our very first fund. We're raising our second fund now. And we have big plans to disrupt. And we only invest in companies run by women and founded by women. And it's really important because women are told you have to have a male co-founder or you won't get funding. So what does she do? She brings the guy on and says, they've been friends, they work together, who knows? And she's like, don't worry, you're not going to have to do much. I'm running the company. I'll give you some equity for, you going on a couple fundraising calls. Well, 5 years down the road, when she goes to sell the company or has a big event, all of a sudden the money shows up and he's like, oh, and starts being disruptive. No, not necessarily a bad person, but it's disastrous for the investors and for that founder. So there are bad things that happen when we have bias. And we got to get women into those positions of power and influence in every part of our decision making in this country. And that's what I'm all about. I'm just disrupting all over the place.
So speaking of the disrupting, can you just go back a minute to what you were talking about before about assisting through grants and other things, women who need various kinds of help, and just share with our listeners a bit about how the corporate women and sort of everyday women in their lives are aligned and lives get better as a consequence.
You got it. Well, what is the case is a lot of working women and men to a certain extent, but we're running up the ladder. It's kind of, we think it's vertical. Maybe we have kids. We don't have time to do everything well all at once, right? You can do everything, but not all at the same time. So a lot of women wake up in their early 40s and they're like, oh, like I have a new life stage here. It's called, literally there's a life stage that starts in your early 40s. And we didn't have it defined previously. But one of the things we know is women are happy if they're doing things together and if they're having an impact together with other women, specifically in this life stage. The other thing that we know is a lot of women who've had their heads down in corporate life didn't have time to really understand philanthropy or understand like how do you solve social problems, but they're super interested in it, especially if they have kids or if they've reached a certain point in leadership, they have a little more bandwidth. They want to dive in and understand it. And so I have very strong opinions about making sure that we do it well. And to me, what that means is if you give a grant, you better trust the people you're giving the money to, and you make it unrestricted. You don't make them have to go through a lot of hoops. And so what we're teaching women is how to do good philanthropy. And it's a giving circle. So everybody puts $1,000 in and we're able to give $100,000 away this year. And hopefully it'll be 10 times that soon. But they also get to meet all these social entrepreneurs who are doing cool, great stuff. And they can raise their hand and say, I'd love to go on that board, or I'd love to volunteer or get my company to give money as well. So it becomes sort of the wedge of introduction that's safe because they're not on the hook one-on-one until they raise their hand. But the other thing that happens is, in this last year and a half, my goodness, it's been so hard on nonprofit leaders. If any of you know someone who's running a nonprofit, be so kind and loving to them, bring them flowers and food, because I'm telling you, it is brutal to try and meet social needs in an environment like this where resources are less. You have the logistics of trying to address all the things that are happening in people's lives are so complex, and even running your organization, and they're pooped. So we have something called a fellowship. It's a Women Leaders for the World Fellowship. It's a global network of 400 women so far that have gone through this program. It's a year-long program where they really get like loving, generous container of support so they can reevaluate their vision for what they're doing with their nonprofit effort, but also give them that place to like reflect on their leadership stance and their core values, and get an executive coach. So we give them coaches for 6 months. And then women in our community are what we call global advisors. So they're that sounding board. It's so lonely at the top in these nonprofits. And so these global advisors become a partner for a year. Well, we say a year, and then everybody falls in love and they become friends for life, and go visit each other, wherever they are in the world. So basically, we're just saying, women in that life stage, sort of starting in your mid 40s, you have so much to give. You have resources, your knowledge and experience, and you're more mature, and you know how to be balanced about that giving and not be so directive, but be supportive. And because you've been there and you've been knocked around a little bit. And so it's a big gift to connect those women with women who are leading justice or other kinds of social efforts around the globe. So is that what you wanted to know?
Can you talk some about this, the Hispanic Heritage Month campaign, and the strategy you're using for that?
Exactly. Okay, so if you look at the data and you're looking at representation on boards or venture investing, either the investors or the people getting investments, Latinas are at the bottom in terms of percentage of representation in all those ways. So we did a lot around Black. Once the George Floyd murder happened, we did a ton of work for Black women for the last year and a half. We had Black Philanthropy Month every week. We had programming. This year, we decided we're going to focus on Latinas, Latina, Hispanic, whatever your definition is, because different people have different, especially different parts of the country have different language. But we wanted to put a special focus on Latinas. So our goal is to get 200 Latinas on corporate boards in the next year. Our goal is to get 50 of those, our Latina leaders, investing in venture in the next year. We're also trying to make sure that there's a way for those women to connect and find each other. Unfortunately, there's not really a place for top Latina executives and leaders in philanthropy and politics to get together and find each other. And one of the things we know is magic happens when they do find each other. The higher up you go, the more isolated you are, especially if you're very, when I say minority, I mean like the minority representative in that company, So connecting all those women is also a big goal of ours, so that they can support each other and together make decisions about what change they want to see. I know what I would like to see, but I want this collective group of women to say, all right, now together we're going to go solve this problem and that's a problem, and we're going to get people in elected office. I'm all over. I just want them to be in power. I want women to be equal, 50-50. Sound good, right?
And when you, I was just gonna say, when you say like you want to get 200 women on corporate board, like what are the steps you take? How do you make sure that that they're gonna find those positions on the boards, and the boards are gonna want them?
Yeah. Well, part of how we get them to want them is, and one of the things we now know is you have to actually legislate this kind of thing, or it doesn't change. We tried. We even had pretty please legislation in California, and nothing changed until we literally just put like $100,000 fee on it and tracked it and made it visible. And now companies are changing the behavior. So in addition to Senate Bill 826 in California that requires gender diversity on boards, we actually also passed a law that requires ethnic and sexual orientation diversity in California on public company boards. So they need them. They don't know how to find Latinas for those roles. And so we want to make them visible and ready. A lot of us women, we seek self-efficacy before we raise our hand. I can promise you, you're better than most of the people that are currently on the board. Did you hear me? However, we're happy to give you a container to make sure you know all the steps, that you know all the financial, and we have classes on how to really get deep dive into financials for a corporate board, how to nominations and governance roles, so all the different committees. So we train people in anything that they need, and then we connect people. So we have 3,000 women coming together in the week of October 18th for something called Get On Board Week. Where we have 30 different programs. We'll have over 200 speakers who are talking about it, corporate director speakers, talking about their point of view, their tips, their journey, and demystifying it. Because so much of it is, people really think it's more complex and that somebody knows something they don't know. And I'm telling you, no, you know plenty. So that's what we're trying to, we want to get the word out to Latinas that are appropriately in the right leadership roles, and let them know, what they're ready for and who needs them, and connect them. We are part of a national network, and there's a great institution called Equilar, who actually is tracking all of the corporate board representation. And so we can sort and say, okay, here are the 20 companies that don't have a single Latina on their board. Here are the 100 companies in healthcare that don't have any Latinas that need someone. And we're making the Latinas visible and connecting them to those corporations. So it's everything from plant the seed so you know when to do it in your career, training women, movement building, policy work, and then actually matchmaking. That combination is a magic science that's been proven. If you work at all those levels, you're more effective in driving change.
So speaking of driving change, and this, I think we've spent a lot of time on this program talking about ways to advance women into executive positions in politics and government, and positions that are related to social justice and women's equality. And of course, there are lessons that women learn in executive spots in the business world that I imagine are applicable in those arenas as well. So I'm wondering if you could share with us some of what you've observed or experienced yourself, and how those lessons can perhaps translate as business women think, in fact, about becoming visible public leaders in, the public square as well as the corporate square.
I happen to be one of these people who really respects women who've committed their life to public service and political leadership. And I don't actually believe a lot of people are like, oh, we should be more like corporations. No, I'm not so sure that's always the good thing. That said, there are women who have built great skills of how to lead teams and how to influence people, and their positional leadership and authority makes them very compelling. And those women, I always, say first, just like, raise your hand for a board or commission. It's a very low hanging opportunity, and it really sort of gets your sea legs under you. Most of the women corporate leaders I know don't do what maybe more men do, which is they'll kind of run a hedge fund, like one of my friends in California, and then say he wants to run for president. To me, there's a little bit in between. And just because you were great at managing money and making deals doesn't mean you're going to be a good governor. So to me, I think you have to actually do a great job at it. I think we over glamorize corporate leaders in this country. So I don't know if that's the right answer for you, Rebecca, but that's really what I believe. I have a lot of respect and admiration for the great skill set that women leading in public service have had to build over a lifetime.
I think the thing about it, just to follow up for a minute, is that you were talking about how women in their 40s are in a different place, right, in position to do different things. But what I've observed and felt in my own life was, in your 50s, that's also true. There are, business women, for instance, who've been, they've been in their professions for maybe 25 or 30 years, and they do want to contribute to the public sector. And the question is, how do they go about doing that? What do they need to think about? What do they need to be sort of prepared to do that, they might not be used to?
Well, we have wonderful organizations in this country that literally they'll go out, and I've been tagged a couple times myself. They'll say, have you thought about running for public office? We train you, we help you raise money, we surround you with great teams, we make sure you've got all the political positioning and connections. So I encourage women to do that. And I think if we had more women who were stepping out courageously and doing that, we would all be in a better position. I think I was telling you, Rebecca, as we were leading into this conversation, about an article that just came out about the top economists that are innovating in the United States, and they're all women. And they've created a new frame on how to think about, like, the measuring stick. And it's not only about growth at all costs, right? They change the framework from which they're defining economic success. Economic success, to a number of these economists, is not having as many billionaires as we possibly can. It's actually having everybody have better economic prospects. And so to me, if we can think out of the box and start to change our frame about how we think about what we want to do in politics, which sometimes looks very ugly from those people sitting on the sidelines. I think that helps all of us. We can say, I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to have a new frame. I'm not going to use the same path. And I think that's how we've gotten some of these wonderful, especially young disruptors in politics, like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. That she's one of the leaders who came out of an effort to really find progressive leaders, support them, back them up, and propel them to success. And whether you agree with her politics or not, she's doing things very differently, and she's quite something to watch. And as a 50-year-old woman myself, 50 plus, I love watching her confidence, and she'll just like give it right back to them. It was kind of beaten out of us in the Midwest, when I was growing up. I don't have a lot of that in me. And I just watch these young women, and God, it's so wonderful. I just get tickled watching their strength,
So, I wonder, as you were talking about talking to corporate leaders about becoming entrepreneur, becoming don't yeah, and donating to organizations and things. Is there a role for the corporate women to think about helping women like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez? Like that sort
yes.
of the helping
Yeah.
back up
Honestly,
kind of.
when I was talking about our giving circle, I was kind of talking about like that easy onboard. Like I can just put $1,000 in. I can be completely passive. I can start to get more involved. We've done that in venture too, like 25,000 minimum investment, easy, soft onboard, right? Similarly, we have gotten women together, and we have supported some, political agendas, and the women themselves have supported the candidates, and we have organized that. So I don't know if you know Ilhan Omar out of Minnesota. So when she was literally still in the state, there was a film that was made about her ascension called Time for Ilhan. And I met the filmmaker, and I was so taken with the vision and what she was doing. I said, well, what kind of help do you need? And she said, well, I need $100,000 to get this into the schools. And I called a friend of mine, and she's like, I'll give her that. So literally somebody whose family made money from the Facebook, growth and IPO, then funded that film being put into schools. In addition to that, we had an event. We raised money for Ilhan. I think we probably sent her $30,000 right when she was going into the federal government leadership. So the women in our network, women corporate leaders, they just need to know how. And they need someone to vet it for them and make it easy, because they're so busy in their day jobs. It is hard for them to evaluate it and start to play in a new arena, whether it's politics or philanthropy or even investing. my experience is a trusted network of women makes it a lot easier for people to sort of step out of their comfort zone because they know other people like Rebecca are watching they've got the expertise and they're watching all the details. I can trust that she's telling me the right thing to do, and I'll sign on. So I think we just need to make it easy for the on ramp for everybody, for wherever they're at. We're all at different stages in our in our development. I always think philanthropically, if you know Maimonides, who's the Jewish philosopher from 2,000 years ago, he's got this step ladder of philanthropy, and the highest level of philanthropy is if you take someone on as a business partner, because no longer are you in a position of power over someone. You are literally sharing your expertise and the journey together, so they get to make money and win when you do. So ultimately, that's the goal, right? Is we say, I value you and I want to bring you along as a partner in the ride.
And exactly where we can go forward and someday soon have another conversation with you about how we can work across these lines of jobs we have, right? But missions that we share. So I'm really glad, Julie, you were able to join us. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Keep us posted. I want to tell our listeners, Julie has had a wonderful career you're going to want to read more about. We put some links to articles about her on the Two Broads website, as we do with every guest. So I encourage you to read, to learn more, and just go out there. And if you're doing your job, also do this public work as well. You'll be pleased that you did so. So thank you, Julie, very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.